An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6, Chapter 61, The Unfrozen. Ooh, brace yourselves. At first, it was just the skeleton, jaw missing from Tyeen's earlier projectiles. But soon, several other wights proved themselves not completely mindless, and began to step across the ice. Some gripped swords, some spears, others even with bare hands. One slipped on the slippery ice, and went crawling on its rotted belly with no hesitation. On the snow-capped island, the rangers of the living readied their weapons.
"You fucking idiot!" Tormund snapped at Tyeen. "You just had to fucking do it!"
"They would have advanced eventually, moron," the Dornish pretender shot back, twirling her dragonglass daggers into position. Jorah planted himself next to Jon, vowing to keep him alive for the Empress.
"Kill the walkers! We can fell half the enemy that way, and make our escape."
Shaking his head, Jon glanced at the still writhing wight, tied up with a burlap sack over his head.
"Do that and we may lose our specimen."
Dany needed to see it. He needed to prove to her that the threat was real. Pointing at the cluster of walkers, Barristan interjected,
"Kill him."
Jon followed the line of sight directly to the Night King.
He turned them all.
Eyes meeting across the vast distance, Jon's anger rose at the same monster that had nearly killed a Rhaegal and killed thousands at Hardhome. Gripping Longclaw tightly in his grip, Jon's gaze never left the Night King's as he stepped forward and swung the sword into the skeleton wight. Trickling turned into an onrushing torrent. For some reason the assault was staggered, but it worked in their advantage. They spread out, striking out at their undead foes with dragonglass and Valyrian steel. Some, like Tyeen, used agility and speed to lash out at their foes, dodging through parries or bites and running them through with dragonglass before the corpses even noticed she was there. Others, like Tormund or Brienne, used brute force with their broadswords or battle axes to bat away rusted weapons and cave-in skulls and ribcages. Swinging his warhammer mightily, the newly proclaimed Lord Gendry Baratheon looked like his father in his prime, smashing aside half a dozen wights from Robb Stark as the latter ran ice through another's stomach. Jon fought like a man possessed. Anyone watching could tell how he acquired his reputation as the greatest swordsman since Sir Arthur Dayne. Barristan and Jorah guarded his flanks. He weaved fluidly, the sharp Valyrian steel effortlessly decapitating wight after wight. As one got past Sir Barristan and grabbed at Jon's arm, the Emperor punched it in the chest. It stumbled back and ran forward, only to be greeted by Longclaw's extended blade. Her war cry slacking off, Brienne jabbed with her mailed fist into a wight, smashing its skull. The grip on her other arm was gone, but her blade remained out of reach. Kicking with her two legs, the two corpses dragged her closer and closer to the icy depths, refusing to relinquish it. "Fuck you!" she screamed, but as another wight popped into view charging for her head, she closed her eyes. The end was nigh. "Forgive me, Renly," she thought, unable to carry on her oath to avenge him. Suddenly the grip on her legs disappeared.
"Get up!"
Her eyes opened to find the ginger beard of Tormund Giantsbane, dragonglass axes chopping through flesh and bone alike. Brienne did not hesitate before rolling onto her stomach, grabbing Oathkeeper and leaping to her feet. Dispatching a wight with her Valyrian steel, she grabbed Tormund by the scruff of his furs and dragged him towards the rocks just ahead of the coming swarm. "Fall back!" Jon screamed. More and more were coming, enveloping two brothers of the Night's Watch and threatening to overwhelm them as well in a massive swarm. Leaf, using her tiny frame to evade the sharp blades and grasping claws, used the last of her firebombs to cover their escape to the rock island, where the high ground could at least offer some advantage. Such advantage mattered not when tens of thousands snarled forward in one massive charge, only to be immolated by a massive burst of flame. Feeling the heat on his face, a gentle warmth to his unburnt dragon's blood, Jon looked up to see the green wings of Rhaegal clear away the swarm with his dragonfire. Up above were Edoron and the smaller bat shapes of Leonaris and Rhaella, darting off to hit other targets. A black shadow came into view, spurring Jon into action. "Get back!" Balerion landed, Dany on his back. Her gaze was transfixed by the sight before her, at the vast mass of dead and the walkers controlling them. At that moment, both she and Jon sent out commands to their children. Stay fast and move with agility through the air. A pair of dark, icy blue eyes stared malevolently at the dragons as they dove, tongues of fire shooting out in large jets at the thousands of dead foot soldiers surrounding the trapped men. Mere rotted meat and fodder, tens of thousands more where they came from. Wordlessly, not that he had spoken a single syllable in thousands of years, the unearthly demon once known as Marden Stark swung off his undead horse. Monarch of the dead. He had his pick of the freshest and most intact mount. A telepathic command brought forth one of his subordinates, moving to the quiver to bring him an ice spear. He had missed the smaller dragon long ago at Hardhome. He would not miss again. Suddenly, he spotted the silver hair blowing in the wind, blizzard gales having whipped it out of its braid. Icy blue eyes widened in complete shock and wonder. It was as if the Night King saw a ghost, a spectre of the past long since disappeared, long since torn away from him.
Sire,
The subordinate was puzzled by his sovereign's hesitation.
what troubles you?
It's her. That face. After so long it couldn't be. But it was the closest the Night King could ever find himself after thousands of years.
She is reborn.
The others knew not what he spoke of, but their king refused. Instead, he stared at her, something akin to longing in his eyes. Jon remained below, helping his comrades up onto Balerion's spines.
Get on, brother! Robb shouted. Not until you're all on! Go!
Looking back, he was stunned as the Night King just stood there. The memory of Rhaegal at Hardhome filled him with dread. There was no one and mag to save the dragons here. At long last, the Night King snapped out of his torpor, reaching back for the ice spear his subordinate held. Out of nowhere came Sansenya, screeching at the top of her lungs and lashing out with her claws and teeth. She stayed as long as she could distract the Night King, and fled when she sensed threat, but added critical time. Jon saw this go on, and knew the young dragon could only delay the inevitable. Managing to get Gendry up, without any warning he dove into the fray at several charging wights, Valyrian steel slicing through dead flesh, the special alloy within Longclaw poison to the wights.
Go!
A growling monster found its skull caved in, Jon swinging from the falling corpse to parry a blow from a rusting sword.
Jon!
Dany yelled, her heart thumping in her chest. I'm not leaving you! With a scream, Jon brought his blade to the wood of the wight's raised shield and sliced through the monster's shoulder, felling it.
Go now!
Running, waving his arm in the air, out of nowhere a cluster of 4 wights slammed into him and sent him tumbling into a gap in the ice. Jon only had time to draw a gasp of air before the icy cold water enveloped him. Dany felt the life being sucked out of her. No! The scream was joined by each of the dragons, bellowing deeply in terror.
Khaleesi!
Jorah shouted,
We need to go!
I'm not leaving him! Sensing the pain, the anguish, Jon reached out for Balerion. Not his rider. The father of dragons nevertheless had a connection with all.
Leave! Get your mother out of here!
Indecision filled the bond.
Now, Balerion! Save your mother!
Roaring, the dread reborn stretched out his wings and pushed back with his legs as powerfully as he could. Dany panicked. No! Go back! Save your father! Agonizing over the decision to leave him behind, and how he would need to face Rhaegal afterwards. Balerion, nevertheless, followed his father's order. His belly and legs smacked into rock and ice, trying to force himself to stay in the sky. Those on his back gripped onto spines or each other, Gendry nearly slipping off if not for Robb quickly grabbing his hand and hauling him back. All others watched their leader, ice spear in hand, as the large dragon's wings struggled to ascend into the air. Gusts from the flapping sent hundreds of their army to the ground. But he refused to move. Instead, shocked still as he stared at the rider atop the dragon.
The beast's my king,
one of the walkers urged. It was not too late to acquire one for their army.
Quiet, General.
A single raised hand silenced him. The Night King's gaze rested on the large black dragon, her riding on its back, as it finally became airborne.
We do not need her beasts.
Her eyes met his, time standing still.
There is another.
Balerion's wings beating through the freezing air, Danny felt a sinister chill pierce her down to her very core. The dragon's flight path brought her into the line of sight of the otherworldly demon, the Dragon Empress, eye to eye with the Night King. The final proof in what she had hoped to the very heavens above was a lie, was a myth. But John had been right. Tears fell from her eyes. John, whatever gods are listening, please protect him. Just as Daenerys and the others left the battlefield, she heard it. The Night King opened his mouth, and out came a piercing scream. A high-pitched roar, one that even caused the mighty dragons to flinch. A scream that would haunt Daenerys till her dying day. The heavens cried in agony. Rain and wind battered lands as far as Pike and the great grass sea, raging storms forcing the anger of the divine upon the realm of humanity. The fragile equilibrium that had kept strong since the end of the first long night, punctuated only infrequently by ripples such as the decadence of the Valyrian freehold leading to its doom, or the sheer might of Aegon's conquest of Westeros, had already been shattered with the return of the Night King. Such a throbbing, chronic pain couldn't compare at the moment to the sheer agony caused by yet another disturbance. A ceremony, an offering, one of purported royal blood, of the line of kings recognised by the divine will, the scions of House Baratheon, since the offspring of Ormond Baratheon and his wife Rhaelle Targaryen, sister of Maester Aemon, had such blood, passed on to the usurper king, Robert Baratheon, an affront to the divine, given his sins, but stomached through his connection to the true royalty. His blood, though, died without legitimate issue, a fact unknown to most, a fact that led to a great war consuming Westeros. In such ceremony, the offering was of royal blood, the blood of the sister of the current usurper of the throne, Joffrey Baratheon. A sacrifice of his own blood through that of another, an act of filicide animethia already, but the lack of the true blood of an ordained king drove the divine towards madness. For weeks the storms raged and earth shook, unholy command to strike down the one tasked with saving humanity, rippling the existence apart from the seams, reaching down at this very moment. As the one promised collapsed into the icy depths in utter solitude, the heavens found the antidote to their anguish. A secret passed down from Stark to Stark, one half dormant since the days of the Kings of Winter. In the blink of an eye, the one known for the longest time as Jon Snow found the gift passed to him by his mother return in full. Jon kicked and kicked the blackness below, forcing away the tendrils of death as he struggled towards the light of the surface. He would not die in this forsaken icebox, not while his wife and children remained in need of him. All around the shards of cold stabbed at him, but it only felt numb, a twist of fate, or providence, in which he could barely feel the freezing temperatures soaking his clothes and surrounding his body. Was it overwhelming his senses? Jon had no idea, but charged for the surface none the less. Above him, the icy waters scalded his eyes. Jon could make out the faintest flashes of a red-orange flame. The flat surface broke as a stilted corpse, caved in overhead, was engulfed by the depths. Another joined it, and then another. Jets of red-orange soon joined by the flashes, like Rhaegal's, only smaller. Confusion only amplified as a gloved hand was thrust beneath the tantalizing surface, open and offered to him. Jon took it, feeling a strength and warmth not of otherworldly malevolence of the others. With a heaving strength, it pulled him up and out of the water. All around the swirling snows obscured much. Columns of whites charged forth, dragonfire from young Sangsenya keep bringing them back as far as her tiring breaths could. Gasping, sucking in the cold air to his numbing lungs, Jon looked up to find a face lost in memory. A familiar face that shocked him to his core.
"Got your sword, boy?"
The face yelled over the howls of wind and white.
Uncle Benjamin?
The Emperor's voice was weak, but from exhaustion rather than from cold.
There's no time to argue.
The last surviving child of Rickard Stark hauled his nephew to the waiting horse as he spoke.
Your girl's blasts are dying. Come on!
Sansenya spat another blast of dragon fire at the screaming corpses, wings beating hard to stay level. Unlike her brother, her young throat and fire glands tapped out quickly. Her throat grew tired, flame slacking. With a regretful hoot, she fell back, plopping to the ground near her father and hissing, teeth bare to fight off whatever came her way. Eyeing the dragon's instincts, Benjin mounted his horse, John barely conscious alongside him.
Hold on, nephew. This is gonna be bumpy.
Readying his chain, Benjin aimed for the safest pathway out of the frozen hell. One only a quarter covered in the blue-eyed corpses. With lantern aflame, he charged into the fray. White after white found their heads or rib cages caved in by the force of the spinning mace, lifeless bodies set alight in the brilliant pyres. Benjin's steed smashed through others with sheer momentum, Sansenya joining the fray with the remnants of her dragonfire. A pathway was cleared. Handing a spear to his king, the other commander registered what would have been a surprise, if he was capable of genuine emotion, when the silent monarch refused. He and his comrades stared at him in confusion. The Night King turned, his mind communicating with his commanders.
It is not his time.
Looking back at the retreating figure, he narrowed his eyes.
He will protect her until the right time.
Long, silver hair, angelic face. The woman reminded him of a time long past, a time stolen away from him. He would have it back, even if he had to create mountains of corpses across the entire world to get it. The snows swirling around the army of the dead only grew into a maelstrom in his wake. Shrieks of the army of the dead disappearing behind him, growing fainter and fainter as the Night King ordered them back. Benjen allowed himself to look down on his nephew. The years had been both kind and painful to him, leaving a strong but scarred man from the quiet yet idealistic youth he had last seen. A man that had finally found his destiny. Hearing about him and his exploits from the Three-Eyed Raven, the late Three-Eyed Raven, kept Benjen's spirits high, in his desolate isolation from it all.
You're not shivering, John.
It just hit him. Mind still clouding from the fatigue, John suddenly became aware of the fact as well. He really couldn't find anything to say. A northerner got used to the chill, to the biting snow and ice, with the sharpness of the finest blade. And he had never felt out of place even in the worst snowstorms, but he had always shivered in the cold. Benjin eyed him with wonderment, as if he was staring at the gods themselves.
The Unfrozen.
The present from birth in the descendants of the first Starks, but partially dormant for centuries. He barely noticed the screeches from Sansenya as she set into a low flying path alongside his horse, Benjin's heart thumping in his chest. The boy had seen enough tragedy in his life. Cold Hands thanked the gods above that he would be spared the greatest sorrow his ancestor had endured long before. Spyglass lowering, with a heavy heart, Rob stepped back from the parapet. His eyes were filled with grief and worry.
Still no sign of him, or Sansenya.
Mournful hoots rained from above, the dragons still circling the fortress of Eastwatch. They had been at it since arriving back, standing vigil for their father and sister. Arms wrapped around her chest protectively, Daenerys fought back tears, fought back the anguish. It's been days. Given the close calls with the Night King, all had talked Dany out from taking the dragons and searching for him. Jon was resourceful, they had said in so many words. He would have found a way. But after this long, droplets slipped down her face, a possibility destroying whatever was left of her composure. If we can find his body, Marjorie pushed hope even in the face of the worst. Though even to her it seemed far-fetched. She was on the verge of a breakdown as well, the pregnancy driving her emotions mad. Melisandre revived him once. Face drawn into a mask of steel, drawing on all the strength obtained from her time in Ramsay's clutches, Sansa shook her head. His body is likely unreachable. It affected her greatly, but someone needed to be strong. Or worse. All understood what Robb was saying. Marjorie fell into her betrothed's embrace, holding him tight. Sansa closed her eyes, fighting to remain steady at the idea of her beloved brother as meat in the Night King's army. The image proved a breaking point for Daenerys, body shaking as she descended into unrestrained sobs. Heartbreaking to see his Empress cry, Jorah averted his gaze. Her pain brought him agony. Looking out over the vast snows of the land beyond the wall, the land his father had died trying to protect against, Jorah felt an intense anger at the malevolence hidden within that took his Empress's love away. A galloping speck below, a bat-like shape alongside, as they both raced to the each-watch gate, suddenly caught Jorah's eye.
Khaleesi!
Tears welling in her eyes, Daenerys looked up at her Queensguard.
Look!
Just as he said it, the twin blasts of the horn heralded the return of two brothers of the Night's Watch. Old brother. Their watches long ended. Sansa and Marjorie hot on her heels, Daenerys pushed her way to the edge of the battlements, staring down at the figure as it approached. There was Sansenya, flying and screeching towards her brothers and sisters, astride the horse, while one man riding upright, and a second man lying horizontally along the mount. His wavy, raven locks were instantly recognisable. Jon! Tears still flowing, Daenerys dashed for the stairs as the dragons roared towards the heavens. Below, Benjen urged the horse to a gradual halt in front of the steel gate. Leaping off, he gingerly helped Jon onto the ground, Sansenya landing her hot body onto the ground for her father to lean on. She hooted, happy to have them safe.
Easy does it, nephew. You're the one that was promised. Like me, the cold can't kill you anymore. But shock and fatigue can. Cold? But how? That will all be discussed, nephew. Discussed at the proper time. Leave this land. Win the war. Only a united mankind can hope to defeat them. Knowing Robb as Ned had, Benjen was certain that even he would never have believed this, let alone the mad idiot Joffrey. Uncle! Jon felt consciousness starting to overcome him, the numbness masking out the overpowering fatigue. Why didn't you come back? He remembered the riderless horse returning to Castle Black. The scramble amongst the watch, after the first Ranger Benjen Stark's disappearance. I can't. He opened his tunic, revealing a small wound over his heart. The skin there, the colour of ice. Same as the Night King. He got me, that day long ago. The children of the forest found me before I died. Saved me with a shard of dragon glass through the heart. Still, I'm not quite living, though I fight for them. Pointed to the wall. I can't cross until the Night King does. Though he can now. Bran has his mark. And Bran crossed. He may now follow. And the Great Fall will allow him to. Great Fall? It was barely a murmur. Blackness overcoming him. Sansenya cried in worry. He felt Benjen ruffle his hair. Stay safe, Jon. Your mother, Lyanna, would be so proud of you. The last thing Jon saw was his uncle remounting and disappearing into the blizzard. Voices shouting behind him as the gate finally lifted open. Not much had changed from the several days before. Daenerys found herself pacing in front of the roaring fire, anger burning deep in her belly. But while rage and frustration had been the only emotion fueling her then, now such were tempered with a generous percentage of agonizing pain and longing. Gods, when will they let me in? Outside, the beating of wings could only grow louder as all 6 dragons picked up on her mood. Khaleesi, calm yourself, Jorah pushed, rising from his seat to steady her. Daenerys turned her head to the ground,
stomach churning. She had already thrown up the contents of her stomach twice while waiting for the maester to finish treating John for exposure, shock, and various wounds. The churning emotions within her were threatening to make it 3, even though it was empty. Jorah, don't! Danny was in no mood to be mollified. I almost lost the most important person in the world to me. My Emperor. Now he's only 10 feet away and they won't even let me see him! The last few words were an angered shout. In all fairness, Your Highness. At the resultant dragon glare, Davos refused to flinch. He'd seen enough of those from Stannis to be used to it. And at least now he didn't have to worry about losing the rest of his fingers. Before you can hold him and squeeze him and, well, other things, he'll have to get the all clear from the maester. He couldn't suppress a chuckle at her put-out blush. Age and experience didn't mean he didn't like seeing 2 young'uns experiencing true love. A formerly silent figure, sitting in the corner of the hall, chose that time to speak. John will be fine. The once vibrant expression and mischievous eyes of Brandon Stark were a placid calm. To the untrained eye, he seemed devoid of emotion. Not true. Emotion was there, just watered down. Danny didn't really know what to make of Bran, the 3-eyed raven as he now called himself. Since he used his magic to rise to his feet in front of Eastwatch Godswood and proclaim his new mantle. He is the second coming of Azor Ahai. Davos cleared his throat. Well, the Lady Melisandre will be delighted to get confirmation from a Greenseer. Falling into a chair next to Bran, Danny held her head in his hands. I want to believe you, but... She sobbed softly, hating the emotional wreck John's mortality was turning her into. A comforting hand rested on her shoulder. He cannot be killed. At least not now. It is not his time. Truthfully, Bran's green-seeing was vague on the future. He couldn't really predict outcomes, but on this he was crystal clear. John was special, in a manner the true ramifications of still eluded him. Leaf, sitting beside him, Mira was sleeping in one of the guest rooms. Knew, but was tight-lipped. Perhaps it was something that John needed to discover for himself. Or wait for the right moment. The door opening caused all eyes in the room to dart to it. Sir Barristan walked out first, a tired smile forming on his face upon meeting gazes with the Dragon Empress. Behind him was the Maester of Eastwatch. Your Highness. Daenerys was on her feet before he could continue. Is he all right? The moment's hesitation brought on the Dragon Empress. Tell me! The command of the Empress was a must to comply with. Of course, Your Highness. The Emperor is on the path to a full recovery. As soon as the words were said, it was as if a weight had been lifted off Dany's chest. She closed her eyes, sighing in relief. His Majesty's wounds have been treated with herb-infused snow and were applied dressings. None was serious, and a warm stew and the rest which should treat his shock. From his halting tone, Davos suspected something unsaid. And... There's something you're not informing Your Highness, Maester. The dark purple eyes zeroed in on the old man, causing him to flinch. Well? Tell me what this further piece of information is. Clearing his throat, the ancient Maester approached the Empress. I've seen considerable diseases and injury in my long life, Your Highness. Men suffering from fever, from grayscale, from broken bones and smashed and crushed. And I have seen considerable cases of frostbite and cold sickness. If His Majesty was truly lost in the icy wasteland, wet and clothing tattered, he should have the cold sickness. His skin is freezing, but no cold sickness. I can't explain it. Digesting what the Maester said, Daenerys couldn't help but think of the birth of her dragons, of how she had walked into the fire and emerged unscathed, of how John's body was raised from the spectre of death through fire. A dragon does not burn. Could then a wolf not freeze? John had the blood of the wolf inside him through his mother, yet another facet of how extraordinary he was. At this point, it didn't really matter. May I see him? The Maester nodded, and she didn't waste time. As she stepped into the room, Dani could hear her sister's angry voice. You stupid, stupid idiot! Sansa's voice was raised in anger as she berated Jon from beside his bed. Everyone says you have sense, but you don't. There was no reason for this. Rage boiling within her, Dani could almost hear the pain. Your wife and children could have lost you. I could have my brother. After days, finally, the hand of the king broke down.
Sansa.
At the word coming out of her husband, Dani felt all tension leaving her. He is all right. She watched with a smile as he hugged his sister, whispering words of comfort. Jon was a good man, a selfless man. It was why she loved him. Noticing her enter, Robb nudged the two of them.
Sister, let's give the lovebirds some privacy.
Nodding at Dani, he wrapped an arm around the still upset Sansa and led her out. Dani's heart clenched at the sight of Jon. Bandages all over his bare torso, though many of his glaring scars were still showing. He was white, a deathly pale.
Oh, Jon.
In that instant, she was by his side. Scooting over slightly, Jon patted the side of his bed.
Come here.
Before she could say no, he frowned.
Do not disobey your emperor's command.
At his firm tone, she couldn't help but chuckle, and slid in beside him, gingerly, to avoid hurting him. Gods, you're cold. The warmth of Dani's dragon blood felt good against his skin.
I'm fine, Daenerys.
He didn't understand it either, be it the Maester's examination or what Uncle Benjen had said, but he wasn't complaining.
I'm sorry, my dragon.
Despite the cold skin, Dani buried her face into his chest. No, Jon, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. The very concept, an army of dead men, it challenged everything she knew about the world. But it was real. The memory of the Night King and his entire army haunted her. His gaze at her alone filled Dani with fear so deep that it was alien. We will defeat him. Her blood began to boil, feeling a welcome heat on Jon's skin. Remove Joffrey, take back the kingdom, unite all of mankind to defeat the Night King. We will do it all. Wrapping his arms tighter around her, Jon didn't care about that. At that moment, all he needed was her. One last moment of peace, before being plunged into war. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that because, oh boy, that was intense. So much about this chapter. Wow, that was packed. But one thing I really liked was the mythical forces behind it. And I don't just mean the Night King and the dragons. That's the otherworldly stuff we're used to. But the idea that nature itself was angry at Joffrey for burning Marcella and chose to vent its fury by making sure the rest of humanity survived by giving Jon the gift of the unfrozen. Holy moly! Okay, Longclaw, you are smart. Really, really smart. The fact that it can affect the storms and the weather, just wow. And Benjen, I like the idea of that mace being a lantern. I know it's in the show, but it was never confirmed. That's really actually very creative. I'm impressed. And Sansa finally losing it. Ugh, I want to give that poor girl a hug. A lot of people don't like Sansa, and I'm agreeing that she was very selfish when she was young, but she's grown up now, and this is a different Sansa from the one in the show, because frankly, I don't like talking about her. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Check out my other videos, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell, so that you are notified on whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!